Hey guys, it's Caleb Goldner from ComicsAlliance.com here. Today we are going to talk about Dragon Ball Color, which is Viz's new full color edition of the Dragon Ball manga by Akira Toriyama. It starts with the cutoff point for Dragon Ball Z, which is like, I don't know, it's in the hundreds of the chapters of Dragon Ball as it was first called in Japan. It makes the jump probably because Dragon Ball Z is the anime that most North American fans are familiar with from Toonami on Cartoon Network. Like I said, this is the first time that the manga has been printed in full color. This is coming over from Japan where they've done it full color as well. Size-wise, it is the biggest print edition of this material in North America. If you were around in the 90s, in the late 90s, that was the way that Viz first brought Dragon Ball to the States. They were printing Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z kind of simultaneously in black and white and kind of like a single issue floppy, just like an American superhero comic. I'm going to lay out some different sizes of comics just so you can kind of scale. Here's just like a random comic off my shelf. It's an Adventure Time book. As you can see, same size and dimensions. So that's probably, to make it easy on comic book shops and bookstores to carry it, kind of present it that way. I'm going to put it next to the second largest version that Viz has done, which was the Viz Big manga that collected like 3 volumes at a time. And I'll show you in a second to compare, but it had some color pages as well, which is probably the closest thing to full color other than the anime that there's been so far. The tradition in Shonen Jump and most other manga like serialized publications and magazines was sort of to lead off big chapters and big events of the serialized manga with a couple color pages to kind of make it exciting, and then of course it would go back to black and white. But yeah, size wise, let's see, we got the biggest, second biggest. This isn't Dragon Ball, of course, but it's another Akira Toriyama manga, just typical North American manga size. And then here's like of course, the last Dragon Ball volume from Japan. So, in Japan they do them a little bit smaller, more compact, tiny bit bigger in the States. Then we've got this collected edition that Viz recently did, and then we've got full color, which is the biggest so far. The full color though is going to cost you a little more if you want to collect it this way. Typical volume of manga in print is about $10 now. Sometimes they're a little bit cheaper digitally on the Viz Manga shop, which is also going to carry, and currently does carry, the full color edition of this. Let's take a look at the printed pages though, so you can see kind of what they look like. This is nice thick paper, which is a little different than the phone book kind of, well, I wouldn't say phone book, but the more kind of grainy, kind of brownish traditional manga paper, especially in Japan where it was actually more phone bookish and has a nice texture to it. This is even a step up from the last volume, which was very much, the white was very white and the blacks were very black, so you had a lot of contrast, which made it look similar to how Viz is doing the material in their digital shop. This is the same thickness and weight of like your average superhero graphic novel or collected edition. So like if you've got the Marvel or DC trades, this is probably more like the Marvel. It's got actually really nice thick paper, and as you can see from this glare, it's got like a glossy sheen to it. So this thing goes for 20 bucks, and you know, it's got a couple hundred pages in it. I think it's like 240 something. So it's actually pretty good value, which I guess Viz can afford to do since they've printed this thing a million different ways now, and it's kind of a guaranteed seller. You know, a Marvel trade will cost you like 16 bucks now for, I don't know, 80 something pages, 90 pages, depending on what it is. So this is actually not a bad value. Now I'll go ahead and give you a comparison between the color pages in the kind of original as they were printed in the big edition. What you'll notice is, of course, Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball never had a lot of color pages, and then they especially never had a lot of full color pages. You'll notice on these two, you know, it jumps from what's full color, basically everything's colored except for, you know, word balloons and clouds and white stuff, and then it kind of jumps to more of a random spot color look. You know, in Bulma's hair, it's, you know, there's like 3 colors per page or something. And they're all a shade of red. Still cool, and still something a lot of readers are nostalgic for. And of course, some people, if you haven't seen these pages, you've seen them just in grayscale. Same type of stuff, but of course everything is completely desaturated. What's cool about these old pages though, and if you are into like European comics or older comics or heavy metal magazine or anything like that, you kind of like these old school manga colors because a lot of these are done with Copics or similar type of watercolor markers, especially like the stuff from the 80s and 90s. And it's got, you know, it's way better, but it's got something in common with like when you were a kid and you would use Crayola Magic Marker. See like the texture from just grabbed a marker off the shelf and just filled in the blanks. And you know, it gives you a chance to get some cool layering effects. There's like a lot of personality, I guess you would say, in these colors, which is pretty charming, and just something that if you're used to it, you just kind of have fond memories of it and you love it. And even if you're not familiar with them from like these interior pages, you've seen them on the Dragon Ball covers, and the different chapter headings, stuff like this, you know? Like, it sounds weird, but you just dig the texture. It just reminds you of like I guess a simpler time in comic book coloring where everything, the colors sort of match the vibe of the art. Everything was done by a human hand. The new Dragon Ball manga, the full color edition, I don't want to say it totally loses that, but it's obviously digitally colored, and the colors are all modeled specifically after the anime. And the best example of this is if you watch the anime, you know the Kame House. This is colored to look like the Kame House, you know. And let's get a side by side so you can kind of see exactly what some of the differences are. Just pop them next to each other, and you can see it just right there. You know, the Kame House, I don't know who colored, maybe Akira Toriyama or one of his assistants colored the original version, but you know, the house is blue and the sky is blue. It's kind of charming, but there's not a lot of contrast. But you pop over to the new edition, which is modeled after the anime colors, and of course, you know, red, blue, yellow, green, everything kind of pops. Everything's really clear and easy to look at. And you know, Bulma looks the same, characters look the same. And these old school, like the art that was used for chapters and different covers and stuff, it actually hasn't lost any real charm because all the texture from Akira Toriyama's drawings especially on the vehicles, and then, you know, like muscle tone and little details like that, they're all still there. I think the first several pages are probably the most sparse. And, you know, if you read Dragon Ball, it doesn't have a lot of screen tones like a lot of other manga. It's pretty much like a very old, flip back to the old school Japanese version. It's very much like raw Akira Toriyama art. You know, like you look at Vegeta's body here, that dude's body is just a big black mass, you know, and it doesn't suffer at all because Akira Toriyama was such an awesome illustrator and he's got such a unique style that you know what you're looking at. You don't need tons of texture on every page. He can kind of sneak by with just drawing like, you know, his really clean kind of bubbly cities. You know, he did a ton of speed lines, of course, for the action, but, you know, Dragon Ball was, especially Dragon Ball Z, it's dudes yelling in big old canyons, you know, shooting energy at each other, so it didn't need a ton of texture all the time, and so you could have a lot of room to breathe with the martial arts stuff and the speed lines and all the action in a battle manga. So I would say as it goes, it starts off a little, it plays it very straight with the colors. You know, you're very much looking at something that's modeled after a simple anime. And I would say, you know, they still have good texture. It's not totally digital feeling. You know, they introduced some gradients, but it seems like they worked to make them not too, this is a bad word, but digitally. They really tried to layer things, and I don't know how they accomplished that. Maybe they used watercolor tools here and there. But you know, there's not a lot of like hardcore gradients. Like it's easy to see everything, and it doesn't look like they just opened up Photoshop, started using fill effects everywhere like a lot of mainstream comics look sometimes. As it goes though, I said it started off a little bland. You know, this is just a big old blob of green. Looks good, but it's not really like knocking you out. But as it goes, it seems like, I don't know, maybe the colors got more confident, or they felt like they had more wiggle room, or whoever colored this, I don't know who colored it, probably a studio of people, since it's kind of a really tall order and it's classic material. But yeah, as it goes, things start to open up a little bit more, and it actually makes it pretty interesting, and in a lot of ways it looks better than the anime because, you know, it's just fresher, and the line art is totally black and pure and looks exactly like it should. They didn't mess with anything. They didn't recolor any of the black lines to look like other colors. They really kept things pure, and, you know, like on Vegeta's visor, for example, it would have been easy to open up another color layer, see how it's green and clear. They could have just done that, filled it with green, and then they could have changed the transparency on it to really make it look clear. That's something, you know, a lot of artists do now, even on flat colored stuff. But, you know, just made it green, still looks clear. And I thought that was kind of a cool touch. You know, you see on up here where the smoke goes, it kind of fades out, but it's not overly smudged or digitized. So I thought that was really cool. And, you know, some of these establishing shots and stuff, they have a lot more detail than the shots of just characters fighting that are mostly just character heads and energy blasts and stuff like that. So the coloring gets better as you go through the volume. Things get, I wouldn't say more detailed, but the placement of the colors, the contrasts, and just subtle stuff like the shading on backgrounds and stuff, it gets a little bit more pronounced. Last thing I'll mention is just how cool the colors are and how helpful they are with scenes that don't take place during, you know, Dragon Ball Z kind of blue sky, noon, sunshine, no shadow time. Um, the scenes that take place at like sunset or at night, like this scene with the giant ape, they look a lot cooler with color, and especially because they took care not to go nuts with the gradients, to keep things flat and kind of traditional and simple. It really just, if you like the coloring, it's an additive experience. It's like just another cool way to look at the material and read the material, especially if you don't want to sit through years and years of your life watching the anime, which we all love it, but doesn't quite have the pacing of the manga, which I've always preferred. So I'll just go over real quick. The first volume of Dragon Ball Color is $20. That's what it retails for. The digital version, I think, is $13, and that's pretty comparable price per page to how much it is in the individual black and white chapters. I think individual volumes of Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball through the Viz Manga store are $7 digitally, and I think the individual trades are still $8 or $9 or $10 or something like that. So yeah, Dragon Ball full color, I really like it. I was surprised by how much I liked it and how impressed I was. I was really iffy on the first couple pages because they're just so simple, and it just felt like watching the cartoon, I guess. But by the end, I really found reasons to appreciate and enjoy it, so I'm pumped on it. First volume's out now, second volume's out in I think a couple months, and they'll all be in digital and print. Thanks for watching, guys.